A bell tolled across Eldergate as wind slammed a hidden door wide. Rowan Hale braced against the gale while dust leapt like spirits. A whisper brushed his ear, sharp as frost. Rowan said, "Speak, or haunt another." The voice named him Oathbreaker and heir to a war between worlds. Rowan's scar burned as if a brand had awakened. He saw moonlight curl along the floor, drawing a line like a blade. Lyra Vale watched from the archway, her cloak snapping like a banner. Lyra said, "Do not cross until you choose your side." Far below, iron thunder rolled where the sea meets the cliffs. The bell struck again, closer now, as if the tower had breathed. Rowan touched the line and the stones shivered open. A stair spiraled down into cold blue dark. Lyra said, "If you descend, you cannot return unchanged." Rowan said, "Then let change find me first." The stair wound like a coiled serpent, and Rowan counted breaths to steady his pulse. The air smelled of brine and iron, as if the sea had learned to bleed. A whisper trailed him with promises of crowns. Rowan said, "I will not be bait." Far above, Lyra's footfalls faded until only rain spoke. The wall carvings showed two skies tearing apart. Stars poured like sand between them. Rowan traced a sigil that matched his scar, and heat flared beneath his skin. He remembered a door barred in childhood, and the night fire took the orchard. He had run then, but stones do not flee. The stair opened onto a chamber where water hung in the air like glass. The bell's echo arrived late, as if time limped. Rowan said, "If I must choose, I will choose truth." A staff tapped stone, and a calm voice parted the hush. Aldrich Thorne stepped from a veil of spray, with eyes like winter sky. Aldrich said, "You have found the seam of worlds." Rowan felt the chamber tilt as memory shifted shape. The elder traced circles that caught stray light and formed a map of losses. Aldrich said, "Two realms pull at you and both demand blood." Rowan laughed once without mirth, and the sound cracked like old paint. He asked what debt he owed, and why the scar burned at every bell. Aldrich said, "A vow was spoken over you before your first cry." The words landed like stones dropped in deep water. Rowan thought of Lyra's warning, and felt the choice grip him like cold iron. He said, "Teach me enough to refuse a fate that steals my name." Footsteps hurried, and a small flame bobbed like a firefly. Piper Reed burst in with a grin that failed to hide fear. Piper said, "You always pick the most dangerous stairs." Rowan smiled despite the chill, and the chamber seemed less cruel. Piper set a satchel down, tools clinking like tiny bells. She said, "If a door refuses you, I will persuade it." Aldrich watched her with a grief that did not belong to this hour. He said, "Courage runs faster than wisdom, child." Piper bowed like a court jester and kept her hands busy. Rowan told her of the seam and the choice that gnawed. Piper said, "Then we make the choice bite back." The bell's echo softened, as if pleased by laughter. Rowan felt the line of fate slacken, if only an inch. The water curtain trembled and dark surged behind it. A figure formed like shadow, choosing to be a man. King Morkant Draven's voice arrived before his face did. "Morkant," said heir of the breach, "bend and save your small world." Rowan sensed iron law woven through each syllable. Aldrich raised his staff but let it hover, knowing names have edges. Piper shifted closer, daring the dark to note her. Rowan said, "Power that demands kneeling fears standing." The water flashed with distant fires, cities mirrored and broken. Morkant said, "I offer mercy once." The chamber chilled until breath etched the air. The bell did not toll, it listened. Rowan lifted his chin, and the seam brightened as if fed by defiance. Rowan walked beside Lyra as dawn bruised the sky with violet streaks. The fields stretched endless, yet his chest carried the weight of choice. Lyra said, "Every path here leads to ruin or rebirth." Her voice trembled beneath steel. Rowan watched a hawk spiral and envied its freedom. Piper darted ahead, her laughter like flint sparking against sorrow. Aldrich's staff thudded steady, each strike a reminder that time marched without mercy. Rowan said, "If war waits at every crossroad, then I must learn which wound bleeds least." Lyra touched the silver clasp on her cloak and whispered, "My oath forbids me to guide your choice." The words cut sharper than any blade. He felt the seam of trust between them strain, fragile as spun glass. The party reached a ruined arch where vines strangled stone. Piper climbed the crumbled wall, eyes glittering as if secrets clung to moss. Aldrich said, "This place remembers wars long dead." Rowan touched a scarred pillar and felt echoes of screams etched in the stone. Lyra's hand tightened on her dagger, and her breath hitched when shadows shifted beyond. Rowan said, "The walls speak of betrayal." Piper laughed, masking nerves, or maybe they just grown with age. Aldrich lifted his staff, murmuring words that turned the air cool. Lyra whispered, "If the past still bleeds, then its ghosts are not yet silent." Rowan met her gaze, and in it saw a warning deeper than any ruin. A river cut across their path, its current black with storm runoff. The mist lifted to reveal Aloan, guardian of waters, her figure half formed of spray and starlight. Aloan said, "Rowan hail, the tide waits for your oath." Her voice rippled through marrow. Rowan felt the curse burn, veins alight like molten wire. Piper whispered, "She's not mortal." Aldrich bowed deeply, respect weighing his spine. Lyra's eyes narrowed, torn between reverence and suspicion. Rowan said, "What oath demands a price before its worth is known?" Aloan raised her hand, water arcing into sigils that shimmered against storm clouds. She said, "Balance demands sacrifice before it yields truth." The river surged louder, as if eager to swallow doubt. As they crossed by Rope Bridge, a cloaked figure emerged, face hidden in shadow. Darius Vey said, "I fight with you, or I fight against you. Choose wisely." Rowan's grip tightened on the rope, the chasm below a promise of finality. Piper spat, "You arrive late to the war." Darius laughed low, "I arrive when gain outweighs risk." Aldrich's voice was iron, "A friend who bargains loyalty is no friend." Lyra's hand froze at her blade, torn between trust and fury. Rowan said, "Then, walk with us, Darius, but no betrayal has no return." Darius tilted his hood, eyes glinting with ambition, and stepped onto the bridge. The wind howled, as if sealing a pact with invisible ink. That night by fire, sparks rose like silent prayers. Rowan studied Darius across the flames, the flicker painting doubt across his face. Darius said, "I offer paths unseen. Refuse me, and shadows swallow you whole." Piper snapped, "Your shadows are poison." Lyra's voice cut sharper, "Trust earned with threat is no trust." Aldrich closed his eyes, muttering, "Even vipers coil before they strike." Rowan said, "Then speak, Darius, but every word weighs on the fate of both worlds." Darius leaned closer, eyes reflecting fire, and whispered of gates hidden in bone and stone. The air cooled as if the earth itself listened. Rowan felt the scar on his brow throb, binding him tighter to choices that reeked of ash and stars. Rowan led the party into Blackbriar Fen, where reeds hissed like snakes. Mist pressed low and each step pulled at boots with greedy hands. Piper said, "If the marsh swallows me, tell it I bite back." Aldrich tapped his staff, and the mud stiffened around them. Lyra scanned the gray horizon and whispered, "Tracks vanish here by intention." A distant horn moaned, too deep for any mortal throat. Rowan said, "Morkant scouts test our fear before our steel." Darius smirked, "Fear is a purer compass than stars." Piper rolled her eyes and kept close to Rowan's shoulder. Lights flickered along the water, forming a path no map would bless. Aldrich said, "Follow only what remembers your name." Rowan lifted his chin as the fen breathed in, and the lights awaited judgment. The lights gathered into a crown and hovered over dark water. Aloan rose from the pool, her hair spilling like silver rain. Eloan said, Choose the true path and the fen will bear you. Rowan felt the scar flare, and the lights wavered as if uncertain. Lyra said, "Truth is a blade that cuts both ways." Aldrich traced a rune in air, steady and clean, and the nearest light steadied. Darius murmured, "Every crown begs a head to wear it." Piper tossed a pebble, and watched ripples tear the reflection apart. Rowan said, "Guide me, but not with mercy." Eloan lifted a hand, and one light fell onto Rowan's palm without burning. The fen exhaled, and a narrow bank rose like a spine through the mire. They reached a heath where stones stood like broken teeth. Wind scoured the ground and carried a scent of ash. Piper whispered, "This place hates remembering." Aldrich nodded, "Battles rot into silence here." Rowan laid a hand on a standing stone, and felt a heartbeat not his own. A vision struck, two skies ripping while soldiers screamed without mouths. Lyra said, "Tell me what you see before it devours you." Rowan said, "Two worlds tug the same wound, and call it healing." Darius laughed softly, "Pain can be persuaded to pick a side." The stone warmed and bled light that crawled along the runes. Aldrich said, "The prophecy wakes when doubt speaks plain." Rowan stepped back as the ground thrummed like a drum of bones. The wind fell, and a hush cracked open. From that silence stepped a figure in iron and night. King Morkant Draven said, "Heir of breach, bind yourself to me and end the tear." His eyes held oceans frozen, mid-wave. Piper moved to block Rowan's path, hands shaking but sure. Lyra said, "Mercy wears armor poorly on you." Morkant smiled without warmth. "Mercy is efficient when properly sharpened." Aldrich lowered his staff, knowing wisdom sometimes bends to survive. Darius shifted closer to Morkant, as if measuring profit in breaths. Rowan said, "Your end tastes like ash before it is spoken." The megaliths hummed, and a line of frost cut across the ground. Morkant raised a gauntlet, and the air tightened like a noose. The sky tore in a narrow seam, and starlight leaked like spilled salt. Morkant said, "Kneel, and I seal the wound without your blood." Rowan felt the promise grind like chains on bone. Piper hissed, "He bargains with cages." Darius breathed, "Some cages keep wolves out." Lyra stepped between Rowan and the king, eyes bright with stubborn fire. Aldrich said, "Choice is a threshold that remembers your feet." The stones flickered with a map only courage could read. Rowan said, "If a choice is made from fear, it is not mine." Morkant's gaze iced over, and the frost line advanced. The seam widened, and both worlds pulled, demanding an answer none could bear to speak. The megalith field emptied into a hollow where fire pits smoldered with no wood. Rowan felt his chest tighten, as if unseen eyes pried into his heart. Piper said, "This place chews courage for breakfast." Aldrich's voice cracked, some betrayals rip flesh, others shred spirit. Darius stepped forward, cloak swaying, and whispered, "I never walked beside you, only ahead toward power." Rowan's blood froze as the scar on his brow split pain like lightning. Lyra said, "You twist loyalty into a blade." Darius laughed, "Better a blade than chains." Aldrich struck his staff and the flames rose in accusation. Rowan said, "Then you were always enemy, only waiting for the moment to bare your teeth." The hollow echoed the breaking of trust. The air cracked as the hollow revealed visions, Rowan's past carved in smoke. He saw orchards aflame, his childhood laughter drowned in screams. Lyra gasped, "These are wounds hidden too long." Piper clutched his arm, whispering, "You never spoke of this." Rowan said, "I buried them so deeply, I forgot their taste." Aldrich murmured, "The curse lives in what is denied, not forgotten." The vision twisted to show Lyra kneeling beside Morkant's throne, her eyes chained with silver light. Rowan staggered as if struck. Lyra cried, "That is not my choice, but it could become my prison." Rowan said, "Truth mocks us by showing futures that rot hope." The smoke dissolved, but its sting clung to their lungs. The hollow trembled, and Eloan emerged from molten light, eyes full of sorrow. She said, "The seam demands a toll greater than blood." Rowan asked, What toll does truth demand? Eloan raised her hand, showing images of kingdoms split, children starved, and rivers turned black. Aldrich bowed low, whispering, "Sacrifice is heavier than steel." Piper clenched her fists. "No toll can claim him. Not while I draw breath." Lyra stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Then let it claim me." Rowan's throat ached. "I cannot let destiny feast on those I love." Eloan's tears fell, turning to sparks before they touched the ground. She said, "The toll chooses, not you." Silence wrapped around them like a coffin lid. Rowan sank to his knees as despair hollowed him. He said, "If fate writes with iron, how do I unmake its script?" Lyra knelt beside him, voice breaking. "We fight not to change destiny, but to scar it." Piper pressed her satchel into his hands, whispering, "Every lock has a key, and every curse a flaw." Aldrich said, "Strength comes when you stop shielding your wound and wield it." Rowan stared at the scar's glow and thought of nights when silence was his only friend. Darius chuckled coldly. "Your wound is the only crown you own." Rowan said, "Then I will wear it until it cracks the heavens." The hollow groaned as if the earth recognized his defiance. The ground split, revealing a cavern of obsidian fire. King Morkant rose from shadow, his voice thunder. "All paths bend to me, heir of breach." Rowan stood with trembling resolve. "If all paths bend, I will carve one straight." Morkant's gauntlet gleamed as he said, "Then you carve it with those you bury." Lyra drew her blade, eyes hard as diamonds. Piper shouted, "We bury nothing, we build." Aldrich braced his staff, chanting words that seared the air. Darius stood back, torn between sides, his smirk fading. Rowan's scarf flared like a starburst, light spilling into the hollow. Morkant sneered, "Light burns quickest before it dies." Rowan answered, "Or it becomes a fire no darkness can drown." Dawn broke like a blade as banners climbed the ridge and snapped in iron wind. Rowan felt the ground thrum with marching hearts. Lyra said, "If we falter, the seam swallows both worlds." Piper checked fuses and smiled without mirth. Aldrich traced a ward in the dust and whispered names that steadied breath. Darius watched the horizon, weighing profit against ruin. Rowan said, "I will not trade lives to buy a quieter conscience." Horns answered from the vale where Morkant arrayed his ranks. Eloan rose from mist and said, "Water remembers every oath. Keep yours." The sun cleared the hill and lit their faces like verdict. Rowan lifted his hand, and courage rose like heat from the earth. The first charge shattered the quiet, and arrows stitched the sky into a grim tapestry. Piper sprinted low, laughing like a dare. Lyra said, "Hold the left or the center dies." Rowan drove into the press where fear tried to speak. Aldrich raised his staff and a circle of calm grew like dawn inside storm. Darius slipped through gaps and cut where eyes did not look. Eloan's wave slammed shields and flung them open like doors. Rowan said, "No throne can stand on broken names." The enemy reeled, then locked into cold precision. Morkant's banner tilted, and the field learned a harder lesson. Amid the crush, Aldrich faltered and smiled as if a burden finally named itself. Aldrich said, "The door you need opens only with a life freely given." Rowan seized his sleeve and felt old scars under cloth. Lyra cried, "Do not pay what is not owed." Piper shook her head so hard the world blurred. Darius said, "One coin buys many gates." Aldrich pressed his palm to Rowan's scar and heat rolled like summer thunder. He said, "Make the wound a key, not a cage." Light erupted from the ward and flung enemies back like seeds before wind. The circle dimmed as Aldrich's breath thinned, and the field went suddenly quiet. The ground drank Aldrich's last word and the seam yawned like a wound. Morkant strode through firelight and offered a hand that promised order. Morkant said, "Bind to me, and I spare what you cannot save." Darius stepped close to the king, eyes bright with chosen hunger. Lyra said, "Walk away, and I stand against you." Piper lit a ring of charges and said, "Pick a side before the fuse does." Rowan felt the key the mentor had forged within pain. He said, "Mercy without freedom is only tidier chains." Darius laughed and raised his blade toward Rowan's back. Lyra turned, steel singing, and met betrayal with spark and grit. The fuse kissed powder, and thunder leapt across the ridge. Smoke curled into a crown above Rowan, as memory and fire welded. Lyra said, "Take the choice and make it yours." Piper shouted, "Now, before fear invents another rule." Morkant lifted his gauntlet, and night pooled in his palm. Rowan stepped into the seam and felt both worlds drag at bone and vow. He said, "I choose no master, only the cost I can carry." Light poured from the scar and braided with Aldrich's fading echo. The rift narrowed to the width of a promise, then held. Morkant snarled, and the day bent, but did not break. The valley ignited in chaos as steel clashed and magic roared like storms unchained. Rowan pushed through fire and shadow, scar burning brighter with each strike. Lyra shouted, "Do not yield, the breach feeds on doubt." Piper darted among fallen, sparking charges that split enemy ranks. Aldrich's echo lingered in Rowan's mind, whispering courage where silence threatened. Darius cut with ruthless grace, blades dripping betrayal and loyalty both. Morkant's voice rose above all, "Bow, and I crown you with eternity." Rowan snarled, "Your eternity is wrought." The earth split under Morkant's gauntlet, swallowing soldiers whole. Rowan lifted his sword, as lightning crowned his defiance. In the frenzy, Piper stood before a giant, blade raised though her hands shook. She yelled, "Not one step further." Rowan surged to shield her, but she struck first, steel ringing with desperate courage. Lyra carved a path beside them, her fury a storm of silver. Darius vanished into shadow, reappearing with blood on his blades. Rowan said, "Your bravery is worth more than crowns, Piper." She grinned, breath ragged, "Then crown me with survival." Morkant's laughter boomed as he shattered the ridge with a sweep of his arm. Dust swallowed the stars, but still Rowan's scar blazed against the dark. Eloin rose through the broken earth, water spiraling from her palms. She said, "I break the law of guardians, for balance tips beyond repair." Her body glowed, fractures of starlight bleeding through her skin. Rowan cried, "You'll burn yourself away." Eloin smiled, "Better ash than silence." Waves burst across the battlefield, drowning fire and fury alike. Lyra shouted, "She chooses what we feared to face." Darius muttered, "Even laws bow to endings." Piper reached for Rowan's arm, her eyes wet. Rowan said, "We owe her more than survival. We owe her victory." The water struck Morkant, and shadows recoiled like wounded beasts. When the flood withdrew, Rowan faced Morkant across a field stripped to bone. Morkant said, "We are mirrors, both cursed, both cast aside." Rowan felt the truth cut deeper than swords. Lyra called, "Do not listen, he poisons truth." Darius chuckled, "Yet poison sometimes reveals the wound." Rowan said, "You turned your wound into a crown of ruin. I will turn mine into freedom." Morkant's armor cracked, shadows writhing like serpents desperate for flesh. Piper whispered, "End him before his lies find roots." Rowan raised his blade, scar blazing like a star caught in his skin. Morkant's gauntlet swung, black flame devouring the last light. The final clash erupted, Rowan driving forward as lightning split sky and stone. Morkant met him with shadow coiling like a serpent of night. Lyra leapt beside Rowan, steel singing, her face ablaze with resolve. Piper hurled her last charge, flame spiraling through the storm. Darius hesitated, torn between victory and betrayal, his blade wavering. Rowan cried, "I carry scars not to kneel, but to fight for what lives." Morkant roared, "Then die with your fragile fire." Their swords struck, light and dark, bursting like suns colliding. The world shuddered, and silence cracked open to swallow the field. The silence after the clash felt older than stone. Smoke thinned, and stars blinked through torn cloud. Rowan stood swaying, sword lowered, breath scraping like gravel. Lyra said, "If you fall, I will catch you, even if the world forgets me." Piper knelt beside broken shields and whispered names she refused to lose. Darius watched the dark face stripped of swagger, as if hunger had found its mirror. Elowen rose from dwindling waves and said, "Balance holds, but not without scars." Rowan touched his brow and felt heat fade to ache. He said, "We are not finished, only changed." The field exhaled like a beast that had learned mercy. They gathered at the seam's edge where light threaded like silver wire. Elowen said, "The tear will knit if given a vow shaped like truth." Lyra squeezed Rowan's hand once, fierce and brief. Piper said, "Then speak it loud enough to shame the dark." Darius looked away and murmured, "Vows charge interest none can afford." Rowan smiled without ease. Debts mean little if paid together. The seam shivered, listening like a sleepless judge. Rowan said, "No crown, no chains, only a road we guard with open hands." The thread brightened, and the wind turned soft as a prayer. In Eldergate, bells tolled not for doom, but for counting the living. Rowan walked the ruined lanes, and felt grief bow but not break him. Piper said, "We fix what can be fixed and bless the rest with memory." Lyra organized lines of aid, voice bright with tireless flame. Darius arrived with wagons taken from deserters and shrugged, "Payment, not penance." Elowen traced water through cracked cisterns until fountains breathed again. Rowan said, "Let mercy be loud and banners be quiet." The city answered with small laughter that sounded like dawn learning to speak. At the tower, Aldrich's staff rested where light met shadow. Rowan touched the wood and felt a quiet like rain on old roofs. He said, "Your door opened, and we found a way to stay." Lyra bowed her head and whispered, "We carry you forward, not behind." Piper set a charm on the stone, small and stubborn. Darius said, "A map drawn in sacrifice is hard to ignore." Elowen smiled thinly. He knew which threshold needed his name. Rowan lifted the staff and the seam hummed, gentle and watchful. The tower breathed, and dust rose like a soft amen. Night returned, with a sky clean as river glass. They stood on the cliff where two worlds had tugged like rivals. Lyra said, "If the dark wakes again, we answer faster." Piper grinned, then let it oversleep. Darius offered a half smile. "I will hear of profit in peace, for once." Elowen said, "Balance holds when brave hearts refuse quiet lies." Rowan looked at the seam, now a scar of light, and breathed steady. He said, "We walk forward, not away." A distant bell sounded, not warning but promise, and the stars leaned closer to listen.